so that it all becomes ordinary. And they scientifically know that between the age of 5 and 7, they've developed critical facilities. So they start developing those critical facilities, and of course it's accelerated by television and everything else because they're gathering more data.
I'm your host, Dr. Joe Dispenza. Let's begin.
Our thoughts actually create reality. Consciousness and energy create reality, not just some thoughts, but all of our thoughts create reality. And that the students acquire knowledge and information so that they could have a more expanded reality. That if we have a small knowledge base, then we have a small reality. And if we have a larger knowledge base, then we get a chance to experience a larger reality. So the student becomes a scientist in the reality by seeing what thoughts produce a certain result. And the third premise is that is to make known the unknown. Now, what does that mean to the average person out there? Our thinking produces reality. If we have a greater level of thinking and we could actually give ourselves permission to analyze and to scrutinize and examine the what-ifs and the possibilities inside our brain, then we would all of a sudden start having alterations in our reality. So making known the unknown, the human brain is aware in that level of the brain of 400 billion bits of information, but we're only conscious of 2,000. Do you know what those 2,000 are? If your back hurts, if your shoes are tied too tight, if you're wearing a hat, if you're hungry, if you're bored, if you're tired. It's only aware of information that has to do with the physical body. So this is where we're living. Our mind is living in the sea of the 400 billion bits of information that's constantly bombarding our brain in a second, but we keep choosing the same input into our brain. And the first law of the mind is called the law of association. And the law of association is how the yellow brain works. We use or identify past experiences to really build a bigger model. We identify with our knowns. When you associate, you're drawing from your present knowledge base to be able to understand. Didn't I say that a neuron looks like a big tree? How many people image that? The moment you image that, you associated what? A neuron with a tree. And you went, oh yeah, I know what that looks like. So we learn by these associations, and those associations develop a groundwork to listen. It makes a groundwork to accept things as ordinary or common. You know, when you're a child, you're constantly, why do children constantly interact with their environment and pick things up and do all that stuff? Because their brain is learning at an alarming rate. And what they're doing is trying to sort out the laws so that it all becomes ordinary. And they scientifically know that between the age of 5 and 7, they've developed critical facilities. So they start developing those critical facilities, and of course it's accelerated by television and everything else because they're gathering more data at an alarming rate that's giving them information to associate with. So law of association says, I associate with my present knowledge base to be able to understand another concept or another idea. That's a great thing. That's a good thing that the yellow brain should do. The second law of the brain is called the law of repetition. And the law of repetition says, if I do something over and over again, what's going to happen? It's going to become common or ordinary or easy. Think about any skill or task that you've ever learned. At first you start to learn it and it's hard and you can't get it, but what do? You keep practicing it over and over again until it becomes common or easy or ordinary. Now I use this example when I do my lectures to the beginning students, but here's a great example of the law of association and law of repetition. When I was in college and I had roommates that always fell asleep when they studied. Well, I studied at my desk, and they laid on their bed and read the book. And within 15 minutes, I'd look over my shoulder, and they would be face planted into the book, drool all over the book. Now, what does the law of association and law of repetition say? Law of association says, I associate bed with, and I go to bed so that's gonna be an ordinary or an unconscious process, and you can guarantee that in 15 minutes, that associative pattern is going to put them to sleep. You understand? So we learn by the law of association, the law of repetition, and they give rise to habits and behaviors. And that's a great thing. That's how we build models of thought. If I said if you could see the nerves coming out of the spine, they look like spaghettis coming out of there. Can everybody see what that looks like? That's how we associate. You have made that uncommon process very common. You've made it ordinary. You've had to review it over in your mind. You've had to model it in your brain. You've had to picture yourself doing it. You've had to do it almost to the point where you're bored that many times. And there comes a moment where it clicks, right? And you've just what? Had a very linear process become very non-linear. And the moment that that happens, this part of the brain is endorsing that neural net. It's giving it permission to happen. And when that happens, you can drive your stick shift, have a conversation, drink a cup of coffee, talk on the phone, steer with your knee, do all of that stuff, right? But if I asked you to do that when you're initially starting out, you didn't have enough neural connections up there. So I said to them, and I was appealing to the neurologists in the room, I said, so neurologically, if we can make those connections in our brain, and you had the science of manifesting something from nothing, out of nowhere, then would everybody agree with me that the moment that we practice that over and over again, that uncommon process would become very common? So could you have a conversation at the dinner table and just manifest a loaf of bread? You could absolutely do it. It would be no effort to do, just like to drive your car, because it would be hooked up neurologically to this part of the brain. And once it's hooked up here, it becomes very ordinary.
All of those cars and homes and whatever that is, there are symbols of what it looks like when a person actually arrives at this concept called abundance, right? So if those things help them to associate with something that creates a feeling of abundance, and they're building their vision board to help them to get clear on their intent, then that's fine, because they're associating objects or things or material things that they'll say, that's when I know that I'm abundant. That's fine. Other people will say, look, abundance just means that I have more than I need, and I'm happy with that. And for them, there's a feeling that is associated with that. And when they begin to dream about their future, they may see themselves in a scene or see themselves a certain way. I don't care what it takes for the person to get there, because once they have their abundance, and this happens quite a bit in our work, when you finally have everything you want, there's only one thing you're going to ask yourself: how am I going to contribute to the world? How am I going to make a difference? So we use different tools to help people to get to that point. But if the person's doing the vision board and they're saying, when I get my new car, I get my new house, I get my new relationship, then I'm going to feel so great. Well, then they're back to the program, waiting for it to happen for them to feel the emotion. They're believing their outer world has to change in order for them to feel better. There's no effect of drawing the experience to you with that way. So the person has to use those tools to get them into the emotional state for them to feel like it's already happened. Now think about this. If you get up from a creative process and you feel grateful, you feel a love for life, you feel a joy for existence, you feel a passion for the moment, you will not be looking for your future, because you'll feel like it's already happened. It's the moment that we start feeling those self-limiting emotions that we feel separation, and then we start looking for it again. And well, then if you're waiting, you're not creating, you're in separation again. So then whatever it takes for you to move into a state of being. And what is a state of being? Thoughts are the vocabulary of the brain. Feelings are the vocabulary of your body. How you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So then if you wake up in the morning and you come back to your senses with a clean slate and you say, I don't feel anything, and you say, well, let me start thinking about all the problems in my life. Well, all those problems are connected to different people or different objects or things at different times and places. The moment you remember your problems, a memory is a record of the past. You're thinking in the past. Every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So all of a sudden you start feeling unhappy, you start feeling bitter, you start feeling frustrated. So now your body's in the past. So then most people then create a state of being that's connected to their past. And if they're in the familiar past, then they are going to crave the predictable future and they're going to fall back into routine. So then we want people then to get very clear on that vision of their future, however they do it, and begin to combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion. And the stronger the emotion they feel from the vision they're creating, the more altered they feel inside of them, the more they're going to pay attention to the pictures in their mind. And now they're remembering their future. And biologically, it's exactly the same as remembering your past. In fact, if you're not being defined by a vision in the future, it means you're making your past more real than your future. Mm-hmm. You're falling in love with your past. You're more in love with your past than you are with your future. That you're believing in your past more than you're believing in your future. When you get to that moment where you have that feeling, that's your compass. Because that feeling is going to drive your behaviors. It's going to drive more of those thoughts. And when you feel that feeling and it's visceral, no person, no thing, no experience will stand in the way between you and that vision. And you will be initiated by the universe into wealth. You will be initiated into health. You'll be initiated into freedom. Those people, all those people that have healed themselves of all those different health conditions, they are so humble and so happy, and they feel so great that they would never trade this feeling because of what you thought of them. They've left that program behind a long time ago. They actually don't care how you think of them. They actually are so happy with themselves that they are no longer dependent on anything outside of them. Now, I think that's a really important moment because that's the moment we give people permission in our lives to do the same, right? And I think that more and more people are beginning to figure that out as they do this work.